Hey everyone, Steve here, and in this video I'll be opening and testing out the new version 2 of the Dreamcast to USB adapters by Raphnet. Now, I've actually been after these adapters for quite a long time. I think they were out of stock for a little while, but in typical Raphnet fashion, they're back with new features that you can find complete details of on their website. In terms of packaging, these adapters come in a nice resealable pouch, but there's not much else to it. There aren't any manuals or documentation with it because they're all online. It does come with the USB cable separate from the adapter, so if that ever fails you can swap it out, which I always think is a nice touch. So the aim of this video is for me to run through a basic test of all official Dreamcast controllers that I own, except for the light gun, because obviously light guns require CRTs to work. Now you may or may not find this enjoyable, but I'm just going to be using the Windows USB controller configuration tool to test all these out. So basically, if I do something on the controller and it registers a button press in this tool, that counts to me as working. So first up is the standard basic Dreamcast controller. Now, as you can see here that when you have a VMU plugged into the controller, a cool Raphnet logo does show up on the screen of the VMU, which is again another nice touch. There is no VMU functionality via these adapters, so that's basically all you can get and expect. When you have your basic controller plugged in, you do get an analog stick input, analog triggers, and generic buttons for everything else that you can map to an Xbox 360 controller using a program like Xoutput. Next up is for me the most important thing to test, and that is the Dreamcast Green Goblin arcade stick. Now, I say it's the most important thing for me because right now I don't have an adapter that works for this to USB. The other Mayflash adapter that I have doesn't recognize the Z and C buttons, and basically that just gives you a 4-button arcade stick with a start button at the top and the joystick, which isn't really good for much else besides Neo Geo games. And Tekken, of course. But I come bearing great news in that this Raphnet adapter does recognize all the buttons on the arcade stick, making this the hands down winner in that category. So with the arcade stick done, next up is the fishing rod controller. Now this one will give you an analog stick input and all the buttons that you expect, and when you actually turn the reel, that'll also act as another analog input where the more you spin, the higher the value goes. So it must be doing some sort of magnetic or gyroscopic sensing, not too sure, but that does give you another type of input. But interestingly enough, when I've tested myself the Mayflash adapter with the fishing rod controller, you do get a button press when you shake the controller if I'm remembering correctly, which this adapter doesn't. So shaking the controller is like I've shown before in my Soul Calibur video where there's actually some sort of motion sensing within the controller that's separate to the reel and the buttons. With the fishing controller done, next up is the Dreamcast twin stick controller. Now, for me, this is most famously used for Virtual On the Dreamcast, and so when you plug this into the Raphnet USB adapter, you get 6 unique buttons per stick. So these are made up of the 4 up, down, left, right directions, the trigger button, and the top button on each stick. And there are 2 additional buttons that you can use as a start and select as well if you'd like. And now, if I'm remembering this correctly from the Mayflash adapter, moving the right stick on the twin sticks when you plug it in doesn't actually do anything at all. So again, the Raphnet one is the clear winner in this instance. And then finally in this test, I've got the Dreamcast wheel. So this is just the basic black steering wheel, and when you plug that in, you get analog left and right steering, analog panels that you can use for brake and acceleration, and the rest of the buttons work as expected as well in terms of being able to map to some other input. Now I say that's the final test, but that isn't exactly true because I'm going to be testing out the Dreamcast keyboard and mouse. And you might be thinking, why would you want to adapt a Dreamcast keyboard and mouse to a computer where you're already likely using Bluetooth or USB keyboard and mice? And I don't know, like the great thing is that Raphnet decided to include this functionality, and it's got a keyboard and mouse mode. Now, obviously, you're going to need 2 adapters for this, and I have 2, not just for this purpose, but luckily I do have 2 adapters. So when you plug them in, you have to download Raphnet's Adapter Manager software, and then basically within that software, find your adapters that will have different identifying numbers, and switch one of them to keyboard mode and one of them to mouse mode. And then basically you plug your keyboard and mouse in. You have to kind of mess around and make sure you're getting them in the right adapter, but just change it if it's not the right one. And then hey presto, you've got a Dreamcast keyboard and mouse working on your computer. Everything works as expected. I haven't tested all of the keys and I don't really think that's necessary at this point, but I will point out that by default for me, the mouse DPI seems a little slow. I don't even know if it's called DPI if you're using a ball like the Dreamcast mouse is, but yeah, basically it's a little slow to move. Maybe you can up the global sensitivity in Windows, but I didn't want to do that for this small test. So I got into testing on a game, and I decided to play some original Crysis, because wouldn't that be funny to play with your Dreamcast keyboard and mouse? So after loading up Crysis, I upped the sensitivity in the game, and it was totally playable as expected with all your key bindings and all that. That was fun and a nice novelty for a little while. Although I will say that ball mice have definitely aged, and I wouldn't use one on the regular. So anyways guys, that's it for me testing the Raphnet Dreamcast to USB adapter, which I have to say works amazingly. If you liked the video, a subscribe and a thumbs up would be great, and there's a whole lot more to see on my channel, so I hope you stick around. Thanks for watching again, see ya.